did a questionnaire survey throughout Vanuatu with local fishers and other people that use the water or are on the water and potentially seeing dugongs. So we asked them questions about where they see them, about their fishing techniques, and various other questions, which is part of a bigger project, using a questionnaire that's been used all around the Dugong range in lots of different countries, so we could compare our results. It's often not that easy to travel around Vanuatu. We managed to go to quite a number of the islands and interviewed about 530 odd people for the questionnaire, but there's some photographs of what we had to do to travel to all of these remote places. There's some of the airstrips are just grass airstrips, and if the grass grows too long, then the plane can't go, or if it gets too wet because it's raining, the plane can't go. Sometimes we are going to villages that don't have roads and need to take the boats around the corner to the villages, and sometimes it was easier to go on foot. So there's various different transport methods needed to get around Vanuatu. It's often not that easy, but we did our best. And the results of the survey basically updated what we know about the distribution, so where we find dugongs in Vanuatu. And we find them they're pretty much seen throughout the archipelago. So right from the very north in the Torres Islands and down to the south in Anarchum. But there are places within Vanuatu where they're seen more often. And we've created these hotspot maps. So the hotspot maps aren't just maps where you are more likely to see a dugong. It's a hotspot map for a conservation. So it's where the dugongs there are significant numbers of dugongs, but also threats to their survival. And the biggest threat is gillnet fishing. So we've overlapped the gillnet fishing with where dugongs are seen, and then looked at the other threats as well to prioritize where we should concentrate our conservation efforts. And this is the map in the middle of Vanuatu. And you can see sort of the areas where dugongs are mostly sort of where there's islands, smaller islands off a bigger island. So effectively where there's sheltered waters, where seagrass can grow, which is also where dugongs want to be. We've also created these Dugong Guidelines for interacting with dugongs. So it's sort of aimed mostly at the sort of tourism market, because dugongs, the inappropriate tourism interaction was cited as a potential problem for dugongs in Vanuatu. And we have had in the past a few friendly dugongs in certain places that were seen regularly, and perhaps the way that they were viewed wasn't the best in the past. So we're trying to make sure that when people come into contact with dugongs, when they're diving, when they're snorkeling, or even just when they're traveling through the water, transporting people from one place to another in a water taxi or whatever, that they do the right thing for the dugongs, and we hopefully won't be a threat to the dugongs. So one of the sort of guiding things behind these guidelines is that the dugongs are higher mammals. They're intelligent mammals. They're related to elephants. Elephants have a reputation for having a very good memory. So we assume that perhaps dugongs do as well. So they will remember the encounters that they have. And because they're long-lived, we have the same dugongs in the same areas. So we want to make sure that every encounter with dugongs and people is good for the dugongs as well as for the people. We want them to have a positive experience and not a negative experience. Otherwise, the dugongs will be impacted and people won't be able to see them in the future. So with the guidelines, we have produced a guideline booklet, also a code of conduct for tourism operators based on that booklet. And then a couple of posters for swimming with dugongs, and also for kayaking and paddleboarding around dugongs. They are available on our website. There's the link to the website down at the bottom of the page there for you, and they are available in all 3 languages that we use in Vanuatu, so English, Bislama, and French. And they are available for anybody to use or adapt in any other countries too. So I'll just run a little bit about through what the sort of crux of it is for diving, because we are talking about diving with dugongs in this webinar. So one of the first things to say is, if you see a dugong, it is exciting, but the best thing to do is not to move to start with. Do not swim towards the dugong. So dugongs are quite individualistic in what they do and where they go. So some dugongs are happy to interact with people and some are not. If the dugong doesn't want to hang around with you when you're diving or snorkeling, it will swim away. There is no way you will ever be able to keep up with it if you're swimming and snorkeling. So there's no point in trying to swim after a dugong that is swimming away from you. The best chance you have of seeing it is if you see it, you stop where you are, and if you're lucky enough that one of the dugongs is interested in people, it probably will come over to you and have a look at what you're doing. So swimming calmly, slowly, no splashing, no squealing, and you might have a very, very fascinating encounter with these magnificent creatures. The other thing is that quite often there's a group of divers or a group of snorkelers, and we're trying to discourage people from crowding around them. So we've said that there shouldn't be any more than 5 people, including the dive guides, within 10 meters of a dugong. And everybody else should stay at least 20 meters away so that the dugong doesn't get crowded out. It's really important that because dugongs are mammals, they need to breathe. So they need to go to the surface to breathe. If there's a lot of people around in the water and they are concerned that they might not be able to reach the surface to breathe, they're not going to be very happy. So it's really important to make sure that you never block their road to the surface, and that they don't feel overcrowded. Also, their tails are quite strong. That's what they use to power themselves along. So we recommend that nobody goes anywhere closer than 2 meters away from the tail. Mothers and calves. So mothers with their babies in any live animal are much more protective. So you must be much more careful whenever you encounter a dugong with her calf. The mother might not like people near her calf and is potentially be more aggressive. Not that they're particularly aggressive animals, but they potentially could be. Also, they are very protective. So if anybody gets between a mother and a calf, then that could be a problem. So what we recommend is that if you see a mother and a calf, you need to stay at least 5 meters away. There have been a few friendly dugongs, mostly sort of male dugongs that were young and don't have a lot of other dugongs around them. So they're almost sort of solo dugongs that have grown up to be a little bit naughty when people come around. And that's probably because they've had a lot of interaction with people when they're very young, and haven't learned that to social distance, shall we say, with people as they grow older. So we recommend that if there is a calf, for them to grow up knowing how to behave as a dugong, then you should stay away from all of the calves. Touching wildlife is not a good idea. We discourage anybody from touching dugongs. They often come up look like they want to have a scratch, but we don't know if they carry any diseases, and we don't know if we carry diseases that are not going to help them. So again, social distancing is a good idea when you're around dugongs. And yes, stay away from flippers and tails, and also don't try and feed a dugong. there's quite a number of people here that think they could try and feed dugongs pawpaw, but they don't eat pawpaw, they eat seagrass. So it's not a good idea to try and tempt them to try and eat anything else. And also, as we've said before, disturbing dugongs when they're eating is not good for them. They need to eat a lot of seagrass. So if they are grazing, it's best to leave them alone and let them graze. Don't get too close so that they get disturbed when they're grazing. This image was taken a while ago before we put those guidelines in place. It's probably one of the inspirations for me to write these guidelines. But people can put themselves in precarious positions with dugongs. So this person is not really staying away from the dugong's tail. If you come up behind a dugong and touch it on the tail, it might get a surprise. It might flick its tail. If you're a diver, that could knock your regulator out of your mouth or your mask off. You get panicked. The dugong doesn't like it. The dugong thinks that all divers are bad and won't ever come around divers again. So it has the potential to sort of spoil the experience for the dugong and for future people that want to have these amazing encounters. So, and one of the modern phenomenons, if I can say the word properly, is taking selfies. But there's quite a lot of problems taking selfies with wildlife, because most people tend to turn their back on the wildlife so they can look at the camera whilst they're having their selfie taken, and then they're not seeing what the animal is doing. So you have then the potential to get yourself or the animal into trouble. So yes, when you're filming or taking photos, we remind people to adhere to the guidelines and don't get themselves or the dugongs into trouble. So what else can we do to help dugongs? And as we've said before, if you don't have seagrass, you don't have dugongs. So helping seagrass is really important. So we've started Seagrass Monitoring in Vanuatu, where we have some permanent monitoring sites where we are using the Seagrass Watch methodology. So Len McKenzie at James Cook University has set up this great system of monitoring. He came and trained us how to do that. And it's a very robust but citizen science way of monitoring the seagrass. There's also seagrass spotters, which is part of the a global seagrass conservation initiative, and they have an app called the Seagrass Spotter app that you can snap pictures of seagrasses wherever you go and find them. But as I said, we use the Seagrass Watch methodologies where we put down a quadrant. So there's this square, and we look at what's in the square. It's a long transect that we put down in the same place every time we go, and monitor various things like how much seagrass there is, how tall the leaves are, how much algae there is, if there's any other animals within the seagrass quadrant, and things like that. And this is one of our data sheets. You can see so we record all that information on those data sheets, and that allows us to monitor trends over time. We've only been doing it for about 3 years, so we've not seen very many trends yet, but we intend to have that as a long-term data set. And we've also collected some seagrass specimens to preserve and we will donate some to the National Herbarium as well, so that there was no collection of seagrass specimens from Vanuatu in the herbarium before, so that's part of what we are doing. And the other thing that we are trying to do is raise awareness. So a lot of people here know that dugongs are around there and that they are protected, but we're trying to raise awareness about how to put in place conservation measures to help them survive. like telling fishers around in the Dugong hotspot areas to not leave their nets unattended at night, and to, there is advantages for them for not doing that, not just for the dugongs, but if a dugong happens to get caught in a net, even if it manages to get out of the net, it is going to break the nets as well. So people don't want their gear broken by the dugongs. So in high dugong areas, we're encouraging people to try to not put their nets out when they're not there with them. And also talking about how to help seagrasses, particularly with boat propellers and walking around on the seagrass beds to try and maybe use one path so that not all of the seagrass is being impacted. So we've produced a little booklet about dugongs and their seagrass habitats, both in English and in Bislama, and some posters on seagrasses and dugongs and threatened species, and those are available on our website as well if anybody would like to use them for their dugong awareness activities and spreading the word. They are more than welcome to do so. Now, we couldn't do our work with dugongs without sponsorship or the donors funding our projects. So our current project, which is looking at trying to work out how many dugongs we have in Vanuatu, or certainly in the hotspot areas, and the seagrass monitoring efforts that we're doing, that is been funded by the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund, which is managed in this area, which is the East Melanesian Islands hotspot for biodiversity, by the IUCN Oceania office. So we're very grateful for the funding from that organisation. They also are funding our flying fox and bat projects as well here, which is another threatened mammals in Vanuatu. We were also part of the Dugong and Seagrass Conservation Project, which is now finished, but that started our Dugong and Seagrass conservation efforts here, which was a project involving 8 developing countries throughout the Dugong range. And if you want to find out more about what the other countries were doing during their project as well, their website is a very good source for information about dugongs. And the project was all put together by the CMS, which is the Convention for the Conservation of Migratory Species, which has a Dugong MOU. So it has a particular branch that looks after dugong conservation particularly. And the Dugong MOU Secretariat is a very good source of information about dugongs and coordinates dugong conservation throughout the Dugong range. And of course, we couldn't do our work here without the support of the Vanuatu government and the Department of Fisheries and the Department of Environmental Protection and Conservation. So we're grateful for being able to work alongside them on these projects. So thank you very much for listening to the webinar today. I hope you've enjoyed seeing our dugongs in Vanuatu. And I just put this little picture up at the end because the Department of Tourism has said that one of our marketing efforts for whilst we're in this shutdown from COVID is to send everybody a smile from Vanuatu. And we've got this little picture of one of our dugongs smiling for you. So thank you very much. We do hope that once travel is back up again, we'll be able to see many of you back in Vanuatu, and hopefully you'll have the chance to dive with a dugong whilst you're here. And I think I'm not sure if there's any questions or what we're going to do from here. Oh, Alison, I can't hear you. I think you're on mute.
Thank you, Christina. That was fascinating, and it must be a huge privilege to be so close up to such an amazing species in the water. And obviously the dugong knew something when it came to find you, because you're now protecting them and looking after them and educating people about them, which also is so important. And the Blue Hope campaign is about protecting the oceans and protecting the amazing biodiversity that the oceans contain, and helping to educate children who may not be as fortunate to live near the sea, to understand how important the ocean is to the world, and how we need to change our behaviours in terms of our use of plastic, single-use plastic, to ensure that this amazing planet doesn't get ruined and species die because of our desire for convenience and our bad plastic habit. So thank you again. It was a huge privilege to see the presentation and to see that amazing footage of diving with dugongs who joined you in your PADI exam as well. So.
Yeah, they were checking up on me.
So I think that's kind of thank you for Vanuatu, and also I'd like to give a shout out to Karen Bell, who is our High Commissioner in Vanuatu, who also has been a huge help in bringing the Blue Hope campaign together and making it such a success in the last 5 days. And I hope, here in Malaysia, in ASEAN, Southeast Asia, we can continue to work with the wider region on this important issue that affects all the countries that we're posted in right now.
Yes, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak on this platform as well. I think you've done a great job in putting it all together. So it's been a privilege to be able to do that as well. Thank you. And
these webinars are all courtesy of Asia Dive Expo and the ADEX platform. So we've been able to provide a lot more content, a lot more education, a lot more experiences for the audience over the week that kicks off on Monday with World Oceans Day, and on Tuesday with the Coral Triangle Day, which is a really important part of the ocean here in Southeast Asia that we're keen to protect. And later this morning, we're going to be hearing from Timor-Leste, which is one of the 6 Coral Triangle countries, about how they're going to be protecting their ocean, which has now been designated a hope spot by Missions Lou, Dr. Sylvia Earle's non-profit organisation. Thank you.